Hi, Russell Raphael from North London, Ulysses. Happy Bloomsday for last Monday. And on that day, live in the pub, I read the last 20 pages of Cyclops from this book, Ulysses by James Joyce. So, an exciting passage, and I hope I did it justice. You can catch a recording of me of that reading on uh, the immediately preceding video to this on Patreon. I've also put it on YouTube. It's free for anyone to listen, so please check it out. And what I want to do today is really get under the skin of that. It's quite easy to be carried away by the drama of these last pages, and it is one of the most dramatic parts of the book. But we need to, as ever with Joyce, there's a lot going on beneath the surface that needs looking into. Some of the aspects are straightforward, I think. Perhaps that's just me underestimating it, but there are others that I'd like to talk about today, and that's the point of today's video. So we're starting on, we were at the bottom of page 429. Our themes that have been building up throughout this chapter of race and racism and Irishness and masculinity and sexual potency, and generally, what does it mean to be Irish, and how does Bloom, not really a sort of Jew, not really a Jew, what do we, identity, I suppose, is at the heart of it. What do we feel where we belong? Issues that we see every day in the news, particularly at this time. Controversial issues, issues that deserve debate, and we're not really getting a debate about it, which is a sad thing. Too much polarized views at the moment in the world. And I think Bloom would have been disappointed by all of that. And much of what he says today tries to reduce that and bring it back to ideas of love and humanity. So we'll consider, well, I don't know if we'll consider it in the context of modern news, but we'll certainly consider it in the context of this book. Right, so down the bottom of page 429, Bloom was talking with John Wise and getting quite excited that our nasty narrator describes him as with his duckety mud-coloured mug on him. I'm not sure what duckety means. I know what mud-coloured means, and I'm suspecting that this is another description of Bloom not being quite white, sort of a muddy sort of colour. And then Bloom says, persecution. All the history of the world is full of it, perpetuating national hatred among nations, which prompts the question from John Wise, do you know what a nation means? Well, yes, it is, I do. And then Bloom gives a couple of examples that are fairly anodyne, and he gets laughed at. And then the citizen comes in halfway down that page with the key question for this chapter, certainly this part of it. What is your nation, if I may ask, says the citizen, to which Bloom answers, Ireland, says Bloom. I was born here, Ireland. The response from the citizen is to say nothing but spit into the corner of the room. And then we get a long parody, which I'll come back to. Right, but I think in more general terms, it's implying the spit in the corner is implying that that is not an acceptable answer, that simply being born in Ireland does not make you Irish, which rather begs the question, well, what does? What, if Bloom, as a Jew, not quite a Jew, isn't Irish, but he was born in Irish, what are all about all the other people born in Irish that are considered Irish? What about everyone else in this pub? Um, because Ireland, as pretty much every nation on earth, has had open borders for a long, long time. So if you were uh, simply born in the last 200 years and have any sort of British blood in you, does that make you non-Irish? Yeats is quite a good example of that. And Yeats's Irishness is something that came under a lot of scrutiny and a lot of came in for a lot of criticism. And that Yeats, as an aristocrat, as a Protestant, even though he was writing about lots of quite Fenian symbolic type stuff, was not considered Irish. Well, that's a generalization. There were many that didn't consider him properly Irish, and any of the Protestant aristocracy were not properly Irish. But many of the Catholics would have had some British blood in them somewhere. I say British, Ireland was Britain at the time, but you know what I mean. English, Anglo type blood in them. We're getting into pure blood, and it's quite nasty stuff. And even if you can trace your Irishness back prior to the 1790s and the rebellion, well, the Vikings invaded in whenever that was, 1300, 1200, 1300. So are you simply then just a descendant of another invader? How does that make you Irish? Does that cast doubt on your Irishness? And would you have to go back to pre-Viking invasion to be a true Gael, if you like? Sorry, a true Gael, and in the sense of Gaelic. And what the hell does that mean? We had reference back in, I wrote the page down, where is it? Gaelic, yeah, the sea divided Gael. It was back in, it was an earlier part of this chapter, reference to the sea divide, when John Wise was talking about, we've just come from the Parliament, the council meeting, when the revival of the Irish language, the revival of Gaelic. But it is referred to as the sea divided Gael. Why sea divided? Because the Gaels were all over the place. They were in Ireland, they were in Wales, they were in parts of England, i.e. Cornwall, they were in in Brittany, the whole story of Tristan and Isolde. They were in northern Spain, I believe. So in that sense, there is also nothing Irishness about Gael or Gaelic. So it begs huge questions. Simply this question that is asked: what is your nation, if I may ask? What a question to which there are all answers and no answers. Right. And then we get so we then get a parody, and the parody is really quite funny because it plays on the fact that the citizen has just spat in spitting. He gets some spittle round his mouth, so he takes out his handkerchief to wipe the spittle, and that is parodied as this great, much treasured and intricately embroidered ancient Irish face cloth, on which has been embroidered references to the Book of Ballymote. I don't know where that sits in the context of the Book of Kells. The Book of Ballymote, I think, was written around 1300, refers to the Book of Invasions. My Irish history is nowhere near good enough. Everything I know about Ireland, I only know from this book. I freely admit that. And there's the four evangelists and their symbols. The bog oak scepter, the lion, or in this case the puma, the ox, or in this case the Kerry calf, and the eagle, the symbols of each of the four evangelists. And pictures of representations of Ireland, reference to the Sligo Illuminators. The book of Ballymote was written in Sligo, was created in Sligo. But these and many of the sites of Ireland that are there, but this is a mixed bag in itself. Some are very obviously Catholic references, others are just geographic sites, but there's one or two Protestant references in there. There is the three birthplaces of the first Duke of Wellington, Arthur Wellesley, devout Protestant. The Guinness, Messrs. Arthur Guinness, Son and Company Limited, a Protestant business. So in this parody, it's sort of showing that Ireland and Irishness is a mixed bag. Very difficult to say what is it to be Irish. Goodness me, these are dangerous waters, and I've been swimming in them. So what I really ought to say, as I try and drag myself out of them and find this sort of ladder at the side, is to say I'm no anthropologist, I'm no historian, I'm no student of religion. I am simply someone that has read this book and is trying to form some impressions on what I think Joyce was trying to convey. I may be wrong, I probably am. And lots of alternate views are out there. For goodness sake, don't hang on to my words. Go and research yourself. Right, I'm now diving straight back in them, because right at the bottom, after that lovely little parody, we get right at the bottom of page 431, Bloom's statement, and I belong to a race too. Oh my goodness. So the Pandora's box is now well and truly open. And then on the top of page 432, a race that is hated and persecuted. Also now, this very moment, this very instant. Where do I even start? There is so much in that. Well, let's start with the obvious. He means a Jew. Now, there are lots of people, I don't agree with them, but there are lots of people out there that don't consider being Jewish to mean, don't consider Jewishness as a race. They consider it as a religion, only a religion. Well, I'm an atheist. I'm a Jewish atheist. So I certainly do not subscribe to the religion, yet I feel very Jewish. So what does that make me? So I think one ought to accept that he could be talking about Jews as a race. But we're back into identity, feeling of self-identity, self-worth, belonging. Might he be saying, he's just said he was born in Ireland, might he be saying, I belong to the Irish race, persecuted, hated? Also now, this very moment, this very instant, well, possibly because the Irish were being subjugated in many people's eyes by the British at that time, at that very moment and instant. And we will talk shortly about Bloom's Fenian views. I said last time that Bloom didn't necessarily disagree with a fair bit of what the Citizen was coming out with. He could just see other points of view as well. It doesn't mean he hasn't weighed up and come down on one side or another. So he could be talking about the Irish race, as much as I've just questioned that. He he could be talking about the human race, and I think we can give some credence to that when we get on to our next parody. So we'll sort of save it for that. Um, is he talking about something else? And I actually think this is what I want to come to. Okay, so my view is I think it's pretty obvious he's talking about Jews and the Jewish race, particularly when he says the reference to being sold as slaves at Moroccan auctions at this very moment. At this, well, okay, so there is some historical uh, uh, um, evidence for that, not quite as slaves. I don't think we can say that Jews of Arab lands were slaves, but certainly they didn't have full rights. And it's also the case that they could be bought and sold as commodities. They were very much second class citizens, the Jews of Arab lands, of which there were hundreds and hundreds of thousands, no doubt millions across the Arab world. Um, Certainly hundreds, several hundred thousand, definitely. I think if you add it all up, between 1 and 2 million would be my guess. Now they're almost zero. You can almost count on one hand the amount of Jews left in Arab countries. That's a whole other story. But so yes, there is something in what he's saying about sold by auction off in Morocco like slaves or cattle. But when and the citizen asked him, "Are you talking about the New Jerusalem, i.e., Zionism?" And Bloom says, "I'm talking about justice." So, what does Zionism mean for Bloom? He toyed with it in the butchers earlier in the day. He picked up the Zionist leaflet, Agudat Natayim. He read through it. He was slightly disdainful of it, but he said, yes, there's an idea behind it. So we sort of ambivalent, I would say, is the best we can say. What Bloom's Promised Land in this book, and I think this will be backed up when we come on to love shortly in the next parody. Bloom's Promised Land is not the Israel to be. Bloom's Promised Land is his marriage bed. That is his Zion. And that is what has been usurped, just as Jews believe and have longed for the return to their promised land. I know that's very controversial, especially in this time. I don't want to get into modern politics, but the whole basis of the Jewish religion is a return to that land. And I think that's not Bloom's Promised Land. Bloom's Promised Land is his marriage and his marriage bed, and that is an interpretation of the persecution. Also now, this very moment, this very instant, taking of what belongs to us by right. I think he's thinking of Blazes Boylan and Molly, and he has exploded in that. These thoughts have been gnawing at him all day and have come out in this discussion of race. And I sort of think that's what it's about, and I think that is probably the role Zionism plays in the book. But there is this general implication of how people like the Citizen treat Jews. This implication that Jews, that Bloom, like all Jews, don't really belong anywhere. They're cuckoos, they're interlopers and wanderers. He will describe him shortly as Ahasuerus, the wandering Jew. So again, in just a few short words, you'll see I've wandered from minefield to minefield, but I don't think one can avoid it from reading those lines. One has got to consider all of the possible meanings of that, because they're not terribly sensible on a normal reading. Phew. And finally, I suppose we have to overlay that with the fact that Bloom isn't even properly Jewish. He's being ostracized by the general Irish, for want of a better word. But for all we know in the book, we don't really know, is he being accepted as a Jew? He talks a lot about his old Jewish friends, the Mastianskis and the Citrons and all of that, from earlier in their marriage when they lived just off of Clanbrassil Street, known as Little Jerusalem. But they've long since left that. That was 10 years before. Um, we don't know if he associates with Jews particularly now. There was that glint in the eye when he bought his kidney from Lugach, and he didn't want to go there. Was that the glint of an eye of one immigrant looking at a descendant of another immigrant? I talked about that way back. And this age-old thing, pariah or parvenu, that the immigrant of whatever description always has. Was it Hannah Arendt that came up with that phrase about, what direction do you go? The complete assimilation and the denial of your roots? Or do you remain as the pariah? Do you remain faithful to your roots of where you've come from, but then you're ostracized by everyone else where you get to? So this the immigrant's dilemma, if you like. Anyway, let's move on. 432. Bloom says it's the very opposite of that, i.e. force and hatred and everything else, that is real life. Well, what, says Alf. Love, says Bloom. I mean the opposite of hatred. And then he says, but I've got to go now. I'm so late, and we're supposed to be meeting to go to the courthouse. I'm going to go to the court round the corner to see if Martin's there. Maybe I misunderstood or he misunderstood. And off he goes. This mention of love, first of all, makes me think of, we've had a couple of references in the book to what is that word known to all men, and we don't get an answer, and it's a pretty vague question, isn't it? But one of the main contenders, I think we have to agree, would be love. And the Citizen sort of mocks it down the bottom of page 432. Well, John Wise says, yes, but isn't that what we're told, i.e. in the Bible? Love thy neighbours. More cynicism from the Citizen, but then this parody, love loves to love love, and it's quite amusing, and ends with this sort of childlike religious sort of thing about this person loves the other person because everybody loves somebody, but God loves everybody. Don't worry, it will all be all right. You just have to believe in God, and then you'll be fine. It's a bit like what Deasy said, Deasy's view of history back then. Anyway, quite interesting. Before I get into it, who are some of these people? Don't know all of them. Some are just fairly obvious puns. This elephant from the zoo loves that elephant in the zoo. But I'd like to pick out Constable 14A loves Mary Kelly. Constable 14A, we don't know him by name, but I think in Wandering Rocks, wasn't it? Constable 14A walked past Corny Kelleher and had a quick word, and was blessed by Father John Conmee. Could it have been Constable 14A because he's with Mary Kelly? There was an allusion in that Pork Butchers when Joyce was admiring that girl's hips, the maid from next door, and he remembers that she waxed the carpet, and he quite enjoys watching her hips move as she waxed the carpet. Naughty Bloom. But he imagines that she's got a policeman boyfriend. So might that be Constable 14A, and might she be Mary Kelly? Gertie McDowell and the Boy on the Bicycle we will learn all about next time. MB might be Molly Bloom. The man in the brown Macintosh loves a lady who's dead. We know that this is an enduring mystery in the book, just who is the man in the Macintosh. Many, many contenders. This gives us a bit more of a clue because it's saying he loves a lady who is dead. And I think this brings to the fore our two prime contenders. One being James Duffy from the Dubliners story, A Painful Case, and he wouldn't give in to his love for Mrs. Sinicobe because she was married. Subsequently learns that she's got fallen under a tram intentionally or unintentionally and is dead. And then he really feels quite remorseful. That marriage was a sham. She reached out to him quite desperately and he rejected her. So it could be that. It could also be Rudolf Virag, Bloom's father. There'll be way off in Circe. There'll be some reasonably convincing arguments that he could be the man in the Macintosh. He's committed suicide. I don't know when would it have been? 15 years ago, maybe, something like that. I'm not sure. Was it after their marriage? Before that. No, what am I talking about? Bloom was 20 years old, so it'll be 18 years ago. There will be an implication that he killed himself because after his wife died, he just couldn't bear to go on anymore. So it could be to do with that. I also think that I remember that line way back on page 4 in this book when we were dealing with Stephen. And it's sort of in the middle of page 4. Stephen, an elbow rested on the jagged granite. He looks out over Dublin Bay. And then there's a line, pain that was not yet the pain of love fretted his heart. So when I read a line that says, and this person loves that other person because everybody loves somebody. So you love someone, but they love someone else. Pain was not yet the pain of love, fretted his heart. So Stephen, age 22, what does he know about love? He knows about familial love. He knows the grief of having lost his mother. But in terms of sexual love and deeper romantic love, he aspires to it. He thinks about naked women as he's driving on the bus. He's been to brothels in Paris. He may have been to brothels in Dublin. He's trying bits out, but he's way off, really. And what do Molly and Bloom know of love? They invested in love, and it broke them when their son died. They are both struggling with love and what love means as well, and their feelings for each other, and how that gets channeled in and deflected off into unhealthy situations, both of them. So we're all struggling with love throughout the book. One of the potential archetypes referred to by Bloom in his schemata, he just mentions Prometheus out the blue for this chapter. How does Prometheus fit in here? And it's hard to see anything from the classical tale, but in Prometheus Unbound, the poem by Shelley, what I've read somewhere, was it in Gifford maybe, that as Prometheus is being tortured by Zeus or Jupiter, it's when he, who is sort of the incarnation of hate, it's when Prometheus starts to love his torturer, that the torturer loses his power. When you loving your enemy is step one in terms of turning your enemy from being your enemy. And in that sense, Bloom is aligned with Jesus, aligned with Thomas Aquinas, and the centrality of love to this book, the theme of love and how it plays in this book. Very, very important. So I've probably spent a fair bit of time on that, but I think we need to do so. Forgive me, I think a minute or so ago I said that Bloom had referred to something in the schemata and had mentioned Prometheus. I don't mean Bloom, I mean James Joyce. It's James Joyce's schemata. So go back and listen to that again if you wish. In that context, Bloom has not mentioned Prometheus. Let's move on, and we're going to go at a faster pace from here on in. But those were very, very dense, a very dense few pages, lots to go through. Right. The group, the citizen is put in mind of the Bible because John Wise Nolan says, well, isn't love thy neighbor? Isn't that what we're told in the Bible? And now continuing that theme, he says, yeah, did you read about the Bible in that skit in the United Irishman today about that Zulu chief that's visiting England? The United Irishman with Griffith's newspaper. I think I've said before that Joyce took a bit of a liberty in advancing the creation of Sinn Féin by a year to place it in 1904, but the United Irishman was there and well established and was really the voice of Arthur Griffith, the editor, and who found Sinn Féin in 1905. And here there is an article in there about this Zulu chief, and I'm not sure we've too much to say about it. We know if it's in the United Irishman, it's written from a very anti-English point of view, a skit, so sort of taking the mickey out of England, Cottonopolis, the Manchester, the centre of the cotton industry, and that Queen Victoria has not only given but has autographed a copy of the Bible for this African chief. What's more interesting is when John Wise asks, is that by Griffith? No, says the citizen. It's not signed Shangana, which was his pseudonym. It's only initial P. Joe says, and a very good initial too, says Joe, meaning Parnell. And, you know, there was quite a big schism between those supporters of Parnell and the supporters of Griffith. Or certainly, you know, the more extreme Sinn Féiners, as Molly will refer to them, and that went on to create the Irish Republican Brotherhood. These were not in the Parnell camp. But here, they're all in the pub, they're all reasonably friendly. Joe Hines seems to be, we know what a big supporter of Parnell he is from the story in Dubliners, Ivy Day in the committee room. And not afraid to say it, Parnell in any circle was still so popular in Ireland that even among people that were much more Fenian and nationalist than Parnell, it was still an acceptable thing to say. There's a bit of a reference to Roger Casement, who was a British civil servant, but then was as part of just before the Easter Uprising, just after the Easter Uprising, he's considered to be a spy for Sinn Féin probably, and I think was shot. And now we really get to the core of the chapter when Lenihan suddenly realizes where Bloom has gone and what's really going on here in his view. And that is that Bloom has placed a bet on throwaway. He's almost the only man in Dublin that has. Everyone else has lost their money, and that Bloom, he's not really going to the courthouse. He's actually going to the bookies to collect his money, and he'll earn a fortune because it was 20-1 or 100-5, as they refer to here. Meaning, if you put on 5 pence or 5 shillings or £5, you'll get 100 of those back plus your original stake, so great odds. Right. He was a bloody dark horse himself, says Joe, so more allusion to Bloom as something other than white. And an interesting paragraph at the bottom of page 435 when our nameless narrator goes to the toilet in the backyard. He goes to have a wee to pump ship, and he's got a lot of pee to pump. And it's hurting him. We get these expletives in the middle of it, these ors and these ahs, which commentators said is probably a sign that he's got gonorrhea. But also that he said, God must have done about a gallon. Now, that might just be a euphemism, that he's had a very long wee, but it might not. And a gallon is 8 pints. And he's already working out that Joe has bought him 2 here. Someone called someone else, an unnamed person, has bought him a pint in Slattery's, another pub where he's come from. But it's now 5 o'clock, and he's only arrived in this pub, say, half an hour ago. And he was with Joe, and he was on a job when he was with Joe. So Slattery's probably refers to lunchtime. So it's hard to see how he's had 8 pints through the day. It's possible, but it's hard to see. And if he has, and if quite a lot of that was lunchtime, surely he's been to the toilet since then. So this might be an implication that he's not in the toilet in real time now at Barney Kiernan's at 5 o'clock. One could read this, although I think it's unlikely, but one could read it, that he's retelling this story later. He's clearly retelling the story to someone, and that he goes to the toilet then. But I don't think it matters that much. Anyway, it's interesting, just to ram home the fact that the narrator is retelling this story at some point in the future. And he's moaning about 100 to 5, and that Bloom is always up to some scheme or other, and that Ireland, my nation, says he, and then he spits, and then refers to them as those Jerusalem cuckoos, i.e. these interlopers that arrive in Ireland, con us, and then move on somewhere else. So just more reinforcing of that. Let's move on to page 436. Yeah, that's where we are. So, and then we have this odd passage about John Wise Nolan suggesting that it was Bloom that gave the idea for Sinn Féin to Griffith to put in his paper all kinds of just general tactics and strategy. And so, first of all, we've got the odd notion that Bloom, little Leopold Bloom from our book, is on speaking terms with Arthur Griffith, the founder of Sinn Féin. And secondly, which I find pretty preposterous, he may have met him at some meeting and accosted him and said something or other, and Griffith might have found it difficult to escape him. But I find it hard to believe that Bloom was that influential. But nevertheless, Bloom, from his father, would have had an interest in Hungary and had an interest in the Hungarian tactics for detaching themselves from their occupiers, i.e. Austria, the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And there's something in it. What's also interesting is who's saying it, which I'll come to in a moment. But I've just got Gifford here. So this is the annotated notes which I've used throughout. So in Cyclops at 12.1574, Gifford notes the following: as originally conceived, Sinn Féin did not contemplate violence, but intended the non-violent subversion of English institutions in Ireland and the establishment of independent Irish political and economic institutions. In part, the idea for Sinn Féin derived from a similar and successful Hungarian resistance to Austrian dominion in the latter half of the 19th century. Bloom's contemporaries and the castle, which we'll come to, believe this bit of gossip because Bloom has a Hungarian background and because Griffith was persistently rumoured to have a Jewish advisor, ghostwriter, which is odd because Griffith was very anti-Semitic. But nevertheless, that's some of the background to this. But I also find it interesting that it's being said by John Wise Nolan. So John Wise Nolan's based on a real character called John Wise Power. And the fact that he's referred to throughout here as John Wise, not as John Wise Nolan, might be mixing that up and reinforcing that this is about this real life person, John Wise Power, an absolute arch nationalist and Fenian. Although here he's being pretty respectful to Bloom and pretty decent, unlike Citizen. So we're not casting all Fenians and nationalists as the bad guys. Absolutely far from it. And here we're actually, I think, going to demonstrate that Bloom was pretty Fenian and nationalist himself. So although, life is complex. So John Wise Nolan's wife, or John Wise Power's wife, was Jenny Wise Power. And she had this sort of food dairy shop in which various meetings took place, nationalist meetings took place, and I think some pretty important ones took place just before and just after the Easter uprising. And if we go back to page 225 in our book, in Lestrygonians, Nosey Flynn makes a fairly off-the-cuff remark, but is interesting in this context. It's right down the bottom of that page. I'll give you a moment to find page 225. He says, "It's not the wife anyhow," Nosey Flynn said. "I met him," i.e. Bloom, "the day before yesterday, and he coming out of that Irish farm dairy John Wise Nolan's wife has in Henry Street, with a jar of cream in his hand, taking it home to his better half." Now, there might be absolutely nothing in that. Bloom might simply have gone in there, as he might have any other grocer, to get a jar of cream. But it wasn't. It was that one. And the day before yesterday, he was on the 14th of June 1904. Bloom was associating with some pretty radical nationalists, and he was a customer of their shop, and it might be nothing more than that, or it might be a lot more than that. But I think that Joyce could have chosen any of the characters in this pub to have raised this point about Bloom, but he's chosen John Wise Nolan, who may know a bit more about Bloom than some of the other people in the pub. Okay, let's go further down, and then Martin Cunningham comes in, and John Wise Nolan says, "Well, here's a guy that will be able to tell you all about that, all about Bloom's role with Sinn Féin and the Hungarian system, because Martin Cunningham works in the castle being Dublin Castle, which is the headquarters of the Jewish civil service in Dublin. England ruled Ireland from Dublin Castle." And again, interesting that you've got some dyed-in-the-wool nationalists here, like the Citizen, like John Wise, but they're perfectly friendly with though other Catholics, such as Martin Cunningham, but that work in the castle, because the English, or yes, it was an occupation, it was a usurpation, but they ran the country, they provided jobs everywhere, and you participated in that organization. It doesn't mean that you liked it, but you worked for it because it was a job. And that's what Martin Cunningham does, and he's not castigated for it in this sense. And he's also with another guy that our narrator doesn't really know his name, Crofter or Crofton or even Crawford. Now that might chime with No Man, that Odysseus gives his name as No Man, but also is our narrator thinking this guy, he's a Presbyterian or an Orangeman? Does he even count as Irish? I don't know. I haven't even bothered to know his name because he's an Orangeman. That's all I need to know about him. Doesn't really know his name. Then we come on to the funny parody about the King's messengers, because Martin Cunningham and Jack Power, beg your pardon, and Crofton, let's call him Crofton, who was in also Ivy Day in the committee room, I think, in Dubliners, are the King's messengers, in that they've come from Dublin Castle. They're part of the civil service. And that takes to the bottom of 437. And on 438, Martin Cunningham confirms that yes, it was he who drew up all the plans according to the Hungarian system. We know it in the castle. I still don't believe it's anything more than gossip. Just don't believe Bloom has got it that together to have been able to do this. Bloom is someone that has lost jobs, not been able to hold down a steady job his whole working adult life. So I think it's a bit of gossip, and I think they're assuming he has more influence than he actually has. The fact that Martin refers to him as a perverted Jew, perverted in that, does he mean converted? But he's Jew, but he's not really Jewish, so he's a strange sort of Jew. Also, and there's a slight implication here that as much as we think Martin Cunningham is a decent guy, he's happy to get onto the slightly anti-Semitic bandwagon when necessary. We saw it in Hades, we see it now, but nevertheless, this doesn't detract from the fact that Martin Cunningham is one of the more decent characters of the book. And now the next bit about the birth of Rudy, and all Jews are, will it be their next Messiah, and all this, which I don't think is quite right. I think that suggestion that's more of a Muslim thing than a Jewish thing. But now on page 439, a real sort of aspersions being casted on Bloom's masculinity and his sexual potency. And another anti-Semitic trope. We've had obviously the ones about them being tight and not buying around, about being crafty, having access to secret information, perhaps like the Freemasons, perhaps they're one and the same as. The special smell that a Jew has that sometimes only dogs can pick up on, the Fetor Judaica. And now a further one, that although Jewish women are considered oversexed, Jewish men are undersexed and can't satisfy, incapable of satisfying their women. And the citizen says, "Do you call that a man? I wonder, did he ever put it out of sight, i.e. his penis into a vagina? Well, there were 2 children born anyhow, and who does he suspect?" says the citizen, repeating the joke from earlier, because it can't have been him to have fathered a child. And then this is rammed home by our narrator, saying that, yes, Pisser Burke, his main source of information, told me that when they were in the City Arms Hotel, once a month, Bloom was laid low with headaches like a woman with her period. So that Jews, male Jews, menstruate. They have a funny smell. Is that associated with menstruation and impurity? All of this sort of stuff. These tropes that have been around for thousands of years, from going back to pre-medieval times. And that the narrator thinks in the middle of that page it would be justifiable homicide to kill a man like that. Why? Because he sloped off with his £5 without putting up a pint of stuff. Like a man, because he's not a man. And then, as I mentioned before, when Martin says charity to the neighbour, the citizen refers to him. He's not him, a wolf in sheep's clothing. Sheep, an Odysseus reference to the escape from the cave. Sheep, that's what he has. Virag from Hungary. Ahasuerus, I call him. So his name's not really Bloom, it's Virag. He's an immigrant from Hungary. Ahasuerus, the wandering Jew. That's what I call him. And then the citizen really compounds the racism at the bottom of page 439 by saying St. Patrick would want to land again at Ballykinlar and convert us. So we need to start again, us Catholics, after allowing things like that to contaminate our shores. So couldn't be clearer. Right, well, Martin Cunningham at the top of page 440, having been bought a drink, just got time for a quick JJNS, John Jameson and Son whiskey, says, God bless all, here is my prayer. And I'm sure, amen, says the citizen, and I'm sure he will. And at this point, the Paradis really rips large with a parody that goes on for about 3 pages, and it concerns the blessing of that house. And there is a procession. It's almost as though it's the consecration of a new cathedral. So we have a procession of lots of religious orders, followed by tons and tons of saints. Each of these saints, and lots and lots of real saints, but some less real ones. Saint Anonymous, Saint Eponymous, Saint Pseudonymous, Saint Homonymous, and Paronymus, and Saint Synonymous, that find their way in the middle, as do these ones that may or may not be real, but we've got a St. Leopold and St. Terence that find their way in there as well. Anyway, after that, we get the saints listed out. Then they are there with all of their symbols representing, if they're patron saint of this trade or that trade, they will have something of that trade with them, and then they bless all parts of the house, perform various miracles, and there we are. We can move through that quickly, and we end up with a bit of Latin at the end with the prayer. Maybe because I don't understand a lot of the Latin. I'm assuming it's just a normal prayer, but if you want to, you can spend hours researching every single one of these saints and why they are mentioned there, and up to you. Back into the conversation. Right, Martin Bloom comes back in. He's been to the courthouse to look for Martin. Now he comes back. There is Martin Cunningham. He sort of says, "Oh, there you are. Shall we go?" Martin said, "Yes, we're ready." And then our citizen tells, we get some fairly difficult to read narrative about what he thinks of Jews and how Bloom is just conning them all with his having got loads of money, with his pockets hanging down with gold and silver. And the citizen, then we get the start of our denouement with the citizen saying, "Don't tell anyone, it's a secret." And then Martin tries to get Bloom out, i.e. it's a secret that he's won all this money. Then our parody with the milk white dolphin, although the vehicle that on which Bloom will escape is a horse-drawn cab, so with wooden wheels, which are described there. But it's told in Odyssean terms. Odysseus escapes on his boat, on a boat. And remember, all these references to sheep is that the way Odysseus and his men escaped, because they may have blinded the giant, they may have blinded him, but they're still in a cave with a boulder pulled across the entrance, which they're incapable of moving. But that all these Cyclopes are shepherds, are independent shepherds, and so they have to let their sheep graze. So in the morning, he moves the boulder only enough to let the sheep out, but that each man has tied himself to the belly of a sheep, and so that in that way they escape. And off they go. 3 cheers for Israel, and off they go, and it all becomes reasonably self-explanatory now and pretty funny. If the man in the moon was a Jew is a parody of a genuine song at that time. I don't want to mention the real name of the song. Extremely racist. Instead of Jew, it's another word that rhymes with moon, and we had it before when John Henry Menton described Bloom as one of these in the Hades chapter. Bloom shouts back. So this is the arrogance of Bloom and the arrogance of Odysseus. He now has escaped the cave, and he's in the cab being driven off, or at least the driver is trying to turn the horse around in the street. Bloom can't resist shouting back. With this, Mendelssohn was a Jew, and Karl Marx, and Mercadante, and Spinoza, and we can discuss the accuracy of those. Mendelssohn, certainly born a Jew, not sure if he converted, don't know. Karl Marx, again born a Jew, but clearly, religion being the opium of the masses, became an atheist. Mercadante was a devout Catholic, but apparently, and Spinoza, yes, a Jew, but was excommunicated by his community. So they're all Jews, sort of in the sense that Bloom is. They're Jewish, but not. Interestingly enough, except for Mercadante, who I think is just wrong. And then, of course, we come to Jesus, i.e., the Saviour was a Jew, and his father was a Jew, your God. Martin Cunningham says, look, sit down, he didn't have a father. Stop that, what are you talking about? And then that really angers the citizen, and we get this irony by Jesus, says he, I'll brain that bloody Jew man for using the holy name, which he then proceeds to do. By Jesus, I'll crucify him, so I will. And the only weapon he's got is the biscuit tin, but he is a champion, an ex-champion shot putter, so he could do some damage with his empty Jacob's biscuit tin, which he hurls after the carriage that is just making its escape. So our next parody concerns Bloom's exit from the cave. So he makes his escape because Martin ushers into a waiting horse-drawn cab and parodies the people that were around the door, that man singing the song, the woman that says about his flies were undone. There's a reference to all the ragamuffins and sluts of the nation were around the door. And this is parodied into this beautiful, lovely and reception full of affection that was dispensed to Bloom as he exited Ireland on his return to Hungary. And that reference on around the 4th line there, that Hungarian, which I won't try to repeat, I did it badly enough in my reading, translates to your greatness, my Lord Leopold Flower. And then the ceremony went off with great eclat, with the most affecting cordiality. Bloom is presented with this silver casket, tastefully executed in the style of an ancient Celtic monument, which reflects every credit on the makers, Messrs. Jacob Agus Jacob, i.e. the biscuit tin, the Jacob's biscuit tin, which is thrown after the cab and in Bloom's direction. Lots of music and all the rest of it, and that's all rather amusing. And then towards the end of 446, the narrator reflects on the fact that he throws the biscuit tin, and thank goodness the sun was in his eyes, or he'd have left him for dead. You know, if he wasn't blinded momentarily by the sun, then he would have accurately caught Bloom with the biscuit tin. One is reminded previously there's the obvious thing about citizen being blinded, but also I seem to remember that other racist, Garrett Deasy, way back in chapter 2, had the sun in his eye as well, momentarily distracting him. And then we have one of our last parodies, the whole of page 447 and half of page 448, where describing the biscuit tin being thrown with such force that as it lands and clatters 11 times, 11 earthquakes are recorded on what we now know as the Richter scale. Then it seems to be known as the Macaulay's scale, and destroys pretty much the whole of Inskey Ward and the parish of St Michan, destroys the Palace of Justice round the corner, the courthouse, burying everyone there alive, including Sir Frederick Faulkner, no friend of Bloom and his ilk, and the only thing left of him is this umbrella that is found in the standing in the sea, in the beach of Hole Open Bay near the old head of Kinsale. Eyewitnesses were thought they saw an object, or an incandescent object of enormous proportions, as a biscuit tin would seem, glinting in the sun. Right, continuing on to page 448, the parody goes down halfway through. And then at the end, you've got our narrator saying that the last that was seen was the cab going round the corner with Gary Owen, the dog, running after him as far as he could go. And then we have our final parody at the end of the chapter on page 449, and it's written in the style of this Old Testament biblical sort of narrative from Kings 2, when Elijah and his next in his successor, really, the prophet Elisha, were walking along when a fiery chariot descends from heaven. There's an angel on it, and the angel says, Elijah, I'm afraid it's your turn to go. A bit like Bilbo Baggins at the end of Lord of the Rings. It's time to go off, and in this you will ascend to heaven in this fiery chariot, and Elisha is there seen to witness he go off. So in much the same way, Bloom is removed. We know it's Bloom. Ben, Bloom, Elijah. Bloom has been likened to Elijah since Lestragonians and Elijah is coming, Elijah is coming. There is reference, though, to he stood, beheld him, even him, all with a capital H. And that wouldn't be ascribed to a prophet. That's not Elijah. Now, is that the angel that is there with him, that is God, or the representative of God? So that, and I know we can get into the intricacies of the Holy Trinity, whether Jesus can be separate from God, or if it's the Son of God, or all part of God, and all of that. But I wonder whether some sort of Jesus is supposed to be in there in the chariot with him. Matthew 17, having raiment of the sun fair as the moon and terrible that for awe they durst not look upon him. These were people trying to look upon Jesus with these rays of sun coming out of his clothes. And in our book, Bloom is not really symbolized as Jesus. He is Elijah. Stephen may well be Jesus in the savior of literature. Stephen that would needs to be guided by Bloom, matured by Bloom, so that the James Joyce in his 30s might be capable of writing this book. Abba, Hebrew for father. Adonai, Hebrew for my God. Ben Bloom Elijah, son of Bloom Elijah. Is that son, i.e. Stephen? Could it even be Rudy? Who knows? And then we get this final ending, like a shot off a shovel. Could that be just a comical ending by Joyce? But might it be finally combining our two narrators, our working class narrator live in the pub that has been kept very separate from our parodist? But could that be back to our working class nameless narrator that actually witnessed the chariot go up in the air? Who knows? So there we have it. That's my views on this quite controversial chapter. I think we've hit some pretty controversial topics this week, in particular, race and nationality, and that's all going to come with a bit of baggage. But before we go, I didn't want to go without drawing your attention to a little poison pill I think Joyce dropped in there. I think as we've gone through this chapter, we've felt sorry for Bloom as he paced up and down outside the pub or the cave. He was reluctant to come in, and we assumed, and we're entitled to assume, he was reluctant to come in because it wasn't terribly welcoming for him there. And when he does come in, indeed, it doesn't seem terribly welcoming, and the atmosphere builds, and we worry for Bloom. We think the citizen could turn violent, and that Bloom is being very brave facing up to this giant. But let's remember the Odyssean parable, that when Odysseus blinds Polyphemus, Polyphemus is asleep, so there's nothing he can do, and this fiery olive branch is plunged into his eye. Polyphemus was absolutely defenseless when the winning punch was thrown. And we have our word parallax, looking at things from different directions. Initial impressions aren't necessarily the correct ones. And we've got this line that I would say 90% of readers are going to miss, because it's a few words and you're off to the next bit, and it's all very exciting towards the end of it, the rest of the chapter. But the line's on page 444, and the second paragraph. But begob, I was just lowering the heel of the pint when I saw the citizen getting up to waddle to the door, puffing and blowing with the dropsy. For those medically trained will know that the dropsy is, I don't know exactly myself, but I think it's related to a heart condition. It ain't good, and you're in fairly advanced stages, and your breathing is going to be difficult, and he waddled to the door. So maybe we have to recalibrate our view of the citizen. Yes, he was an ex-champion shot putter, but very much ex, and he ain't in great shape now. And it may well be that he's perched on his stool, and he's been perched on his stool because he can't get off it very easily. He is a sedentary person with a sedentary lifestyle, and maybe Bloom wasn't so brave. Maybe the dangers were in the arguments, but that Bloom perhaps had no concern for physical matters. Yes, Martin was concerned to get him out of there before it turned nasty. But what does turn nasty mean? I get the impression now that I've read that in the context of that, had it turned nasty, I have a feeling one punch to the stomach and the citizen would have been out for the count. And and I don't wish to be graphic about it, but I think it's interesting that we can build up a certain impression of a person through the chapter, but on a rereading, paying closer attention, maybe we ought to change our mind and not think of it in entirely that way. It doesn't soften any of the nasty stuff that the citizen was coming out with, but he was all bite. He was all bark, and I'm not sure how much bite. So I just wanted to make that point. I hope this has been useful to you. I think we've dealt with some difficult themes, race and nationality, controversial stuff, but they had to be dealt with. And we're into easier waters next time for Nausicaa. I'll see you then. I hope you can join me. Bye.